Take a look behind me at the moon. Now take a look right here at this moon. One of these is from Starfield. It's this one. Which, okay, congratulations to Bethesda for recreating the moon. But it turns out they may have done a lot more than that. And today we're putting Starfield to the test to answer one very specific question. How scientific is this game actually? Which feels like a ridiculous question to ask about a space RPG set hundreds of years in the future. Why would any of it be realistic? But the more I looked, the less ridiculous it felt. So today we're going to put it through 4 specific tests. Planetary science, ship and rover design, chemistry, and whether the solar system itself actually behaves the way it should. Also, I'll say right off the jump, thank you very much to Bethesda for sponsoring this video. I'll also say right off the jump, I told them I gotta give the facts as I find them, even where the science doesn't add up, and they said, bring it on. Challenge accepted, Todd. Let's start with the planets. I step off my ship and I'm standing on an orange planet. Correction, an orange moon, orbiting Saturn in the Sol system. Its name is Titan. Because the last time I thought about astronomy was probably in grade 10, I googled Titan. And there it is, an orange moon. I jump. I'm floating. I check the star map. Gravity 0.14 G. I ask Google. Yes, that is Titan's gravity. Holy shit. So I skip the time of day because now I want to see what Titan looks like at night. And that's when I notice something else. A day on Titan is listed as 381 hours and 53 minutes UT. What is UT? Doesn't matter yet, but remember that because that tiny little abbreviation ends up opening a much bigger door later on. The important thing is I Googled how long a day on Titan is, and that was also correct, as were the methane lakes and rivers running throughout. So I'm standing on one moon in a massive solar system and all of this stuff is checking out. For those of you jumping in for the first time, Starfield is out now on PlayStation 5 and I'll try to keep this as spoiler-free as possible. You can hit the link in the description to check out the Terran Armada DLC. Okay, so before we can judge how realistic Starfield is, we need to establish the lens in which we are viewing Starfield. So when is Starfield? The year 2330. And compared to almost every other iconic sci-fi universe, Starfield's 300-year technological leap is actually surprisingly restrained. Yes, they achieve widespread space colonization and grav jump tech, but they're still living in modular habitats. Instead of using holographic controls, they're still using chunky analog interfaces for their ships. Think about our actual real-world timeline. The modern space age basically started with Sputnik 1 in 1957. That was only about 70 years ago. In just 7 decades, humanity went from a little metal ball going beep in orbit to putting humans on the moon, landing autonomous rovers on Mars, sending the latest generation of heavy-lift rockets around the moon, and launching celebrities into space. So when you take that real-world momentum and stretch it across another 300 years, Starfield's technology feels like it's right in line with where it should be. And having solved the gravity issue is probably the biggest leap, because right now doing literally anything in space is an absolute logistical nightmare. You ever see how they pee in space? You attach these vacuum tubes to yourself and let it all get sucked out. Microgravity causes your muscles to atrophy, your bones to lose density. If it wasn't for the awe and wonder of actually being in, space, it looks like it would kind of suck. But Starfield fixes this. By 2330, humanity has mastered artificial gravity. But is there any real science to the grav drives in Starfield? Or is it all just a bunch of guff? Do people still say guff? In real life, the only way we currently know how to simulate gravity in space is through centrifugal force. You build a giant ring, you spin it really fast, and the momentum pushes you against the outside wall. It looks especially cool when paired with some Hans Zimmer organ music. But Starfield ships don't do the giant spinning thing, so what's going on? The answer actually lies in how they're faster than light travel works. In the game, ships use a Grav Drive to jump between star systems. And while the game calls it a Grav Drive, in theoretical physics, this is basically an Alcubierre drive, a warp drive that doesn't actually move a ship faster than light. Instead, it expands the fabric of space-time behind the ship and contracts the space-time in front of it. So instead of moving through space, you are folding space around you. So if the engineers in Starfield have invented a Grav Drive, suddenly this becomes the foundational advancement that allows the rest of Starfield's ship design to exist. Ships don't have to be designed like cramped floating sensory deprivation tanks anymore. You can have a galley with an open frying pan, you can have captain's quarters with an unmade bed. You can pee not into a tube, but this toilet that looks like it would be on a coach bus. But what are the actual odds we build a space-time folding Grav Drive by the year 2330? When the Alcubierre drive was first proposed, the math worked, but it required a ball of negative energy the size of Jupiter, which is a bit of a hurdle. But recently, physicists have tweaked the math. Now they think it might just require an absolutely mind-boggling amount of regular energy. So is it ridiculous ridiculous to think that we could figure out how to build that battery in 300 years? Is this Starfield myth busted? Well, 300 years ago, it was 1726. Blackbeard the pirate had just died. We were crossing oceans in wooden boats powered by the wind, and we had just invented the minute hand on the clock. If humanity can go from pirate ships to the International Space Station in 3 centuries, going from the ISS to folding space-time in the next 3 doesn't sound entirely impossible to me. But I'll have to post an update video for you guys in 300 years to find out if Bethesda got this one right. Stay tuned. But if you're actually going to fold space-time, you need power. A lot of it. Which led me to my next question. What exactly are we putting into the gas tanks? Usually this is the part where sci-fi writers get lazy. They invent a glowing blue rock and call it Nova gas and call it a day. But Starfield doesn't do that. The ships here run on a real-life thing. Helium-3. Now, when I first heard that, my brain immediately went to party balloons, but then I started digging into the actual aerospace research, and I realized something kind of mind-blowing. Helium-3 is a very real, very specific isotope, and it is currently the holy grail of futurist energy research. Look at how we fly right now. We're essentially just strapping a highly controlled chemical explosion to a tube using liquid hydrogen, methane, or kerosene. It's a bit more sophisticated than a firework, but Helium-3 is different. Scientists have been theorizing for years that if you use helium-3 in a nuclear fusion reactor, you can generate a truly astronomical amount of energy. But with one massive benefit, it produces almost no radioactive waste. It is clean, safe, hyper-efficient theoretical energy, which is great except for one problem. Helium-3 is incredibly rare on Earth. Damn you childhood birthday parties. But check out the moon. Because our moon doesn't have a thick atmosphere or magnetic field, it has been getting absolutely blasted by solar winds for billions of years. And those solar winds over time have been depositing massive amounts of helium-3 directly into the lunar dirt. NASA has literally drafted concepts for lunar extraction systems and mining operations specifically designed to harvest helium-3 from the moon's surface to power future fusion reactors. So when we land on a barren moon and set up an outpost to extract helium-3 to increase our grav jump range, we are executing a literal real-world NASA contingency plan. So while we are nowhere near powering rockets with helium-3 today, it is arguably the most scientifically accurate guess they could have made for a spacefaring civilization 300 years from now. Fair play, Bethesda. And if the fuel is real, what about the rest of the stuff we're digging out of the dirt? A massive chunk of the crafting system is pulled straight from real-world science class. You're mining iron, copper, argon, beryllium, and the game even accurately uses the real periodic symbols. It goes even deeper than basic metals, too. You start finding real chemical compounds like benzene, alkanes, and chlorosilines. But then as you get further into the game, things start to get a little weird. You start finding rare exotic materials with names like Caelumite, Vitinium, and X-Tech, which sounds a bit like that fake Nova gas sci-fi nonsense I was just making fun of, right? But here's why it's actually a brilliant design choice. We tend to look at the periodic table as a finished document that we had to memorize in high school that we could then forget forever. But it's not set in stone, and in the entire history of humanity, we've only ever scraped the dirt of exactly one planet. If we actually expand across the galaxy, we are absolutely going to find exotic minerals and compounds that simply do not exist here, which means that the periodic table sadly is going to get even harder to memorize. So by grounding all the common everyday resources in real, accurate chemistry, and saving the completely fictional made-up minerals for the rare late-game tech, Starfield perfectly mirrors what future space resource extraction would probably look like. There's also the flip side of this being an RPG that needs to be, you know, fun to play. And speaking of things that are fun but secretly grounded in science, let's talk about my second favorite scientifically accurate detail in this game: driving. I'm saving my favorite for the end. Because once you actually land your ship on one of these planets, you run into a very real problem. Humans are incredibly slow on planetary surfaces. NASA figured this out pretty quickly. By 1971, during Apollo 15, they realized that if they actually wanted to explore, they needed a car. So they built the lunar roving vehicle. It's basically a lightweight, open-frame, battery-powered dune buggy. And when Starfield added the Rev 8 rover and now the new moon jumper, it seems like they potentially got inspiration from the Apollo mission. They share the same design DNA, an open-frame buggy shape, low center of gravity, and a 2-seat exploration layout. But the absolute coolest detail, and the one that proves Bethesda did their homework, is the wheels. If you look closely at the Rev 8 and the moon jumper, they have these weird open structure hex lattice wheels. Think about what happens to a human body in the vacuum of space. If your suit cracks, the lack of atmospheric pressure causes the gases in your body to rapidly expand. You basically swell up like a balloon. Now think about a normal rubber car tire filled with compressed air. If you put a tire on the moon, the vacuum of space would cause it to just keep expanding. Puncturing a tire 40 million miles from Earth is a death sentence, and your roadside assistance ain't gonna cover the towing costs. NASA NASA knew this, so the original 1971 Apollo rover didn't use rubber tires. It used woven wire mesh wheels made of zinc and steel. And today, tire companies are actively designing airless, flexible lattice tires for future Mars and Moon missions. And the wheels on these vehicles in Starfield directly mirror real lunar rover engineering. Plus, once again, we see the passage of time adding extra enhancements. For the record, the Apollo buggy did not have vertical boost thrusters. I also really love this bottom window down here on the moon jumper, which looks like it's taking direct cues from the real Mars rover prototypes NASA is working on right now. But driving that rover around the Sol system reminded me of why I started looking at all of this in the first place. The gravity actually felt right. Remember earlier when we talked about how Titan had a gravity of 0.14, which was accurate? But what about the rest of our solar system? I started pulling up the map and checking the in-game data for every planet against NASA's actual measurements. Earth is obviously 1.00 G, but Mercury and Mars are listed as 0.38 G, which is exactly right. The Moon is 0.17 G, which is extremely close to real life. Even the gas giants like Jupiter and Saturn are only off by a tiny fractional margin. When it comes to our own solar system, Starfield's numbers are shockingly accurate. But gravity is only half of the planetary physics equation. The other half is time. And remember that weird little UT label from Titan? This is where that starts to matter. If you've played the game, you've probably noticed that when you sit in a chair to wait, it shows you your local time versus UT, universal time, which is basically Earth hours. So I took my ship all the way out to Pluto, sat in a chair, and waited for one full 24-hour local day to pass. The game told me that one Pluto day equals 153 Earth hours. The real rotational period of Pluto, 153.3 hours. I tested Mars. The game put it right around 24.6 hours, perfectly matching the real-world fact that a day on Mars is only about 40 minutes longer than a day on Earth. But this led me to the question that finally made me think I might be able to break the whole illusion. If the clocks are this accurate, does the world actually spin? So I landed on old Earth, looked out at the dusk horizon, and saw this faint red point of light. At first I thought it was just a stylized red star texture meant to look like Mars, but I checked the system map. That red dot was lined up exactly where Mars was positioned relative to my side of Earth. So I stood there, and I waited. And this is crazy. As the hours ticked by, that pale red dot slowly tracks across the sky, and eventually disappeared below the horizon. The Milky Way rotated. The constellation shifted. And after waiting exactly 24 local hours, the sky rotated a full 360 degrees, and that little red dot came right back to where it started. Which means Starfield skyboxes are actually simulating planetary axial rotation. I'm not gonna lie, at this point my mind was kinda blown, but I had to see if I could break it. If the planets spin, do they actually orbit the sun? So I used a console command to skip 300 days into the future. I opened the star map expecting to see the planets shifted along their orbital paths, and nothing. The celestial bodies are locked in the exact same positions, and that is a fascinating half-truth. Bethesda built a universe that perfectly simulates local planetary time, gravity, day-night cycles, and a rotating celestial sky, because that's the science you actively feel as a player on the ground. But they locked the solar system map in place. I would assume the reason being it would probably be super confusing if everything was constantly in a different place when you tried to fast travel, but I'm willing to try the mod. And honestly, understanding where we ended up is exactly why I want to finish this investigation back where we started, on Earth. And my favorite detail in this game. During the main story, you eventually visit an abandoned NASA launch facility buried under the sand in Florida. And as you walk through the rubble of this ruined welcome center, you are literally walking through the exact timeline we've been talking about this whole video. It's a museum preserved in dust. You see the original Apollo capsule, you see the International Space Station hanging from the ceiling, and the actual lunar rover that inspired the buggy we were just jumping across craters in. It is the perfect physical bridge between our present reality and Starfield's future, but it also holds one of the darkest, most scientifically grounded ideas in the entire game, a vision of why a planet like Earth might one day become unlivable. And I'm not going to spoil the specifics here, but suffice it to say, it's real terrifying astrophysics. And standing in the ruins of our own planet is a brutal reminder of just how fragile this whole setup really is. We take Earth for granted, but when you look at the actual science, it's wild how many impossible coincidences had to go perfectly right for us to even be here at all to screw it up. If our planet's liquid iron core doesn't spin at exactly the right speed, we don't get the magnetosphere and we end up looking like Mars. If Jupiter isn't sitting exactly where it is in the solar system, acting like a massive gravitational bodyguard, we get pulverized by civilization-ending asteroids. If our moon is even a fraction smaller or slightly farther away, our planet's tilt wobbles out of control, and our climate violently swings from boiling to freezing. We exist entirely on a razor-thin margin of astronomical luck. And we're just down here arguing about whether pineapple belongs on pizza. We're all gonna die, people. Thank you again to to Bethesda for partnering with me on this video. Starfield is out now on PlayStation 5. Jump in now on your preferred platform to experience the Free Lanes update, which is free to all players, and check out the new Terran Armada DLC. I'm Bandercoot, thank you very much for watching.